Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here, and also a very warm welcome to our audience on Zoom. I really appreciate your participation. We have an exceptional panel here. Thanks to my friend Saurabh, who helped me put me in touch with these amazing people to build this panel that we called it a robotic expert, an investor, and a CEO walk to generative AI events. And then see what happens. So as I said, I'm hosting this series of events under the title Future of the World Post-Generative AI, and my curiosity is what would be the impact of generative AI in different fields. We have had conversation on the impact on startups and VC and what is the future of the world and how generative AI agents going to change the world. And today, we are here with this amazing panel to talk about the impact of generative AI specifically in robotics. I have this theory and I would like you to challenge or agree or disagree. And one thing is I do not want a panel who agrees. I want everybody to freely talk what their opinion is and very respectfully if you have to disagree. It's just the fun part, we want to hear, as I said, all probable ideas. And on generative AI, I do have a sense that the impact it could have in robotics is where LLMs were in chatbots and changing the world early 2022. So there's some signs, but not quite. And this is the sense I have, and I would eventually love to hear your opinion on that. And Saurabh will also, he has more than a decade experience in robotics, and then I always joke around that he gave up on robots and started to have another startup working and helping human beings. It's just robotics didn't quite happen, and he would help me to co-host. So the first question I have, we decided we're going to talk about, maybe you introduce yourself and also tell us, what was supposed to be the first question?
What's a robot?
Oh, yeah. What is a robot? Because apparently robots do not have a clear-cut definition. So I'd love to hear, and then maybe each of you can add something on top of each other or have your own definition. So Michael, please introduce yourself and tell us what do you think a robot is?
All right, hi, I'm Michael. I'm a VC focused on robotics and AI. Generally, just continuous innovation that opens up a new market. We're split between here, Silicon Valley, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Best known for our founding investment into Agility Robotics, robots being used with Amazon and similar. So what's a robot? And that's a super difficult and complicated question. Classically, it's one thing, but there's a whole field of work that's gone into mechatronics, into a set of technologies that are used to create robots. And so our view would be robotics is all of those things that are enabled by the technologies that are collected under those labels.
Hi, everybody. I'm Arshan, founder and CEO of Third Wave Automation. We make autonomous forklifts. And I think a robot is what you call something until it's useful, and then you give it a different name.
I completely agree with that. Now, I've forgotten the exact wording, but there is an ISO standard about what a robot is. And it involves being able to operate autonomously in 2 or more axes. Now, there are actually a lot of things in our life that fit that description of what a robot is. But what doesn't fit that description is almost all of the 4.5 million industrial robot arms out there. If you're familiar with the standard process, standards get revisited every so often. And the definition of what a robot was simpler 15 years ago. And I think this is just giving some more background to the idea that once a robot does something useful, it's just a product. It's not a robot, because we have to keep updating what our definition of what a robot is. And most of the things called robots in the last 60 years probably don't meet the current ISO spec.
And could you also please introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah, I'm Andra Keay. I'm the Managing Director of Silicon Valley Robotics, which is an organization that was founded by robotics companies in the Bay Area, like SRI International, Willow Garage. If anybody here heard of Willow Garage? Okay. Willow Garage is really the OG of robots that we see today. Pretty much, if you're familiar with Ross or a number of the startups that came out of Willow Garage, in some ways Silicon Valley Robotics is a spin-off out of Willow Garage. And back in 2010, when we formed, I could only count about 60 robotics companies in the Bay. Things have changed. It's probably closer to 1,000 today. And so I have a very, very exciting position, ground floor, ground zero of the robotics revolution. And for those that doubt, Silicon Valley region is home to between 20 and 40%, let's say on average 33% of all robotics funding globally, either through the funding here or the companies based here.
That's a hard one to follow. Hi, I'm Saurabh.
You can.
So as Sara said, I am a recovering roboticist. So what that means is I used to be a roboticist and love robotics, but now I just make them with my daughter and not for work. I realize that there's better ways to make money. Yet to find that, but yes, hopefully.
I disagree.
And the other thing that Sarah didn't mention is like when she asked me, like, we should do a robotics panel. I'm like, yeah, let me invite all my friends. So I've known almost all of them here for over 7 to 10 years, and few more of them out here. So yeah, it's been a fun journey to be part of the robotics in the Bay Area. Met Andra when she started Ceremony Robotics. We were at ground zero. Back then, I started the meetup group. She started the actual work group.
Yes, Autonomous Anonymous before it became what's in here.
Yeah, you know,
And,
we just do the fun stuff. Right now, I'm working on a AI startup, not robotics, AI startup for helping people and understanding people better using AI to connect them with opportunities and starting with job space. We are using artificial emotional intelligence, so it has some element of what I've learned in my robotics career, but right now focus away from robotics and more on humans.
Awesome. So before we continue with the next question, how many of you are in AI or generative AI fields? Almost half. How many of you are in robotics? Raise your hand a little higher. So also almost
same
half. And how many of you are just here because you're curious or always had a passion about robotics or generative AI? That's nice. Oh, yeah, I appreciate that. I'm myself in the third category. So I'm like, okay, maybe a little bit of also generative AI, but definitely on the curious camp. And before we start diving into, generative AI impact on robotics, it would be maybe we start from you, Saurabh, as what are the, you started more than 10 years ago in robotics. What was it like back then? What were the challenges back then? Which one of them are solved? Which one of them remain unsolved? Which new challenges have been introduced? Outside only the scope of generative AI, just generally speaking.
Yeah, I think in general, robotics I actually studied robotics at Penn and went to school. And one of the things that back then that was really famous was the DARPA challenge, which kickstarted this autonomous vehicle program. So Penn had one of the car, and I got lucky to be working on some of the applications for it early on and discovering real firsthand as to what it would take to build a robot like that. So autonomous vehicles, for most of us, we consider that as robot. So that was the first foray into that. But when I moved to Bay Area, there were 3 companies technically. Willow Garage, there was AnyBots, which was basically a playground for building cool robots. But then there was Neato, which was a great robotics company for building vacuum cleaners, which was competing with iRobot. I still believe they had the better robot. I still have a few of them, but they shut down recently. So literally, I went door to door in all these robotics companies to see whether there is an opportunity to work with them. But unfortunately, beyond that, there was not much in the Bay Area that I could find. Industrial robotics was still picking up and it was big. So I worked at Adapt for a while, which was one of the OG robotics company in the US, in the Bay Area. The company went under and is bought out by Omron now. but they were building industrial robotic application for warehouses and clean room environment and even food packaging. But a lot of people would think about that as automation, but that was one of the most prevalent robotics back then.
And when did you start in robotics? What were the challenges back then? What is new? What is the skill remaining?
The challenge that we thought was the biggest challenge back when I started was seeing robots transition from the research lab out into the real world. Of course, the more I've studied this, the more I realize that we often forget those early companies that when you look back, they were sometimes as much as 10 years ahead of the time. ClearPath Robotics now, that was 2008. iRobot was formed in 1994, although I think it was 2004 before they released the Roomba. They were pre-funding with PackBot. And I was writing about beauty robots and how there's a crop of really cool companies, RoboSculptor, RoboCosme, Loom, Clockwork, probably forgetting a few here, but that we're starting to see robotics enter almost all of these industries. And then I realized I'd forgotten the OG of the beauty robotics space, which is Restoration Robotics, which is a Bay Area company that had already raised Series C by the time I came over in 2010. So well on the pathway. Now, of course, this is beauty treatments for men, not women. I don't know if that made a difference or not, but it was one of the companies founded by Dr. Fred Moll, who has had an incredible track record at founding great robotics companies like Intuitive Surgical, Auras, obviously Restoration Robotics for robotic hair transplant. I thought that I started off by studying human-robot interaction because I was looking forward to us having robots to interact with. But I became very frustrating while I was still researching because everybody was researching research robots, not real robots. And I got fascinated by what does it take to get robots out there? How do we commercialize? And so I've really focused on the commercialization of robotics.
So what were the actual challenges? What
No
you need to
investment?
transition?
That was one of the big ones. Well, because I got fascinated in what was holding robotics back generally,
Just investment or what?
there was a real, we've come through a huge transition point. And I think anybody in robotics has been talking about this for 20 odd years. It's what spurred the DARPA Robotics Challenge, or the original DARPA Autonomous Vehicle Challenge. And for those that are old enough to remember back, 2004, 2005, 2007. By the time 2007 came along, I mean, you know how many robots completed the DARPA Challenge in 2004?
Actually, what was the DARPA challenge for the audience?
It was for driving 7 miles in a desert. So there was nothing else around. How many vehicles completed the first challenge? 0. Okay. But 1 year later, quite a number did. And then 2 years after that, the challenge was taken out of the desert and it was put into a simulated, well-contained, but simulated urban environment. And at that point, we saw a spending spree on self-driving vehicle companies, and it really kick-started that particular industry. So understanding what are these transition points, because we all know that, like Moore's Law, the power of our technology is doubling almost every year, and the price of our technologies are halving. So if you can do something at X price this year, it's only going to get cheaper to do that. So one of the biggest challenges with robotics is everybody says, oh, hardware is hard and robotics is capital intensive. And, you know, nobody's really interested in funding it. It's very expensive. Well, not all robots are that expensive. But, you know, you have to understand whether or not you're going for a significant market. We saw a whole wave of consumer drones and other consumer robots coming out in 2013, 2014. And I think it was the first time we'd had a real run on consumer-facing robots, all the way up to Jibo. But those robots are nowhere near as expensive as, say, what third wave automation is doing, or people working at a larger scale. So there's opportunities across the spectrum, and we were just at the starting gates for all of them.
So one thing I want to add, we started by definition of robotics. I remember clearly the first moment I realized actually autonomous vehicles are robot. That was not that long ago. So, anything from iRobot, Roomba, what is like the simplest actually, I think even iRobot, Roombas are a little sophisticated. What is the simple, most common robot that we don't even think about it as a robot?
Well, definitely our cars, but if you are fans of Rodney Brooks, and I am, the original idea behind the Roomba was to copy the intelligence of a cockroach. You didn't need to have chess playing abilities to clean a floor. You didn't even necessarily need to know what dirt was or what a wall was. You just needed to move, bounce off the walls, and randomly cover the entire room. People were willing to go away and let the robot do its stuff. And this was all part of technically the subsumption architecture. And there was a movie back then about his work called, was it Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control? The idea that we were right at the start of this wave towards incredibly small, cheap, capable devices. And what can we do with limited intelligence on those devices? Almost we're completely swapped ideas right now with the Gen-AI fever. But I'm still quite fascinated by the biologically inspired, how reactive to the environment can intelligence be? And I think something, Alex, you might remember this, but looking at the nanobot swarm from SRI International and how they're able to come together to build truss architectures using effectively engineered environment rather than intelligence on behalf of the bots themselves. Sorry, I'm going to geek out over that particular field of robotics, which is how little intelligence can you give to devices that still do constructive things?
Wow, that's amazing. So going back to the question, when you started in robotics, what were the challenges? Which ones are solved? Which ones do remain? What are new challenges?
So I think the basic stuff is still the same, which is taking imperfect action with imperfect data, and having to write what you need to do between processing all the data that's almost always late and not entirely correct, along with taking an action that's not going to do exactly what you want it to do, which is still what I'm doing right now. When I started, I was working, I forget the iRobot that didn't have a vacuum. It was the development platform. What was that called? Yeah. So I was working at Sun at the time on wireless sensor networks, and they sold that. So I bought 20 of them, and I had a bunch of interns put my wireless sensor node on it, and then do some figure out the wireless space using these mobile platforms now. And that's where I got started with almost exactly the same problems I'm solving now, but with much more expensive stuff.
If I don't explain what Sun is.
Everybody here knows what Sun Microsystems is, right?
Well,
Very good.
why don't you say it?
So Stanford University Networks, I guess, is where the company started out. I wasn't there. I just worked at Sun sometime later. It was a fantastic, they made Java, they made workstations. I worked there pretty much because they sent me a workstation at home that was better than what I could get at the lab at UC Berkeley at the time. And that's what Sun is, or was.
Awesome.
Actually, I guess they still technically exist, but they're part of Oracle now. So all of the radiance of Sun is very well squashed.
So today, what are
Or just Facebook as well.
Yeah. Java.
Liquid robotics.
Oh,
They
yeah.
founded Liquid Robotics.
Yeah. Bosley,
What's
yeah.
his name?
James Bosley.
James Bosley.
So what are the current challenges as like a CEO who's working in this field? Like, what are the things you want to build, but you can't?
Better, faster, cheaper, I guess is what it comes down to there. And this was the other thing that came out of the DARPA challenge, the automotive challenge, is LiDAR. which
Yes.
changed a lot of things. And I think actually that was the thing that went from 0 cars to all the cars was Velodyne, making LiDARs. And
Would
so,
you please tell us with one line about what LiDAR is?
okay.
We have, we have a very diverse audience.
Yeah. So LiDAR, so if you remember the original Google vehicles that had the big spinning coffee can on top, that's what a LiDAR was. That was one of the first ones. And it's basically, if you think of it's a bunch of rangefinders like in a comb pattern spinning round and round. So you get 3D information. That's very, very imperfect, by the way, over time. But it was much better than everything else you could do then.
Just adding into that, because I really got involved in supporting startups from 2010 through. In 2013, 2014, we had a few little phone robots on wheels going out through crowdfunding, and we had a lot of robot startups, keen roboticists wanting to do mobile robots for delivery, for warehouse, for this, for the other. By 2014, most of them were trying to build cheaper LiDAR instead, because the LiDAR cost was the single biggest thing preventing them from doing the mobile robots that they wanted to do.
So what was the cost per unit back then?
You know the car that we're talking about, Black Stanley? The cost of the LiDARs on top of the car were twice the cost of the car, brand new,
And what is it right now?
$160.
And
No,
what is
the
this?
similar grade is more than that. So it's like it went from about $250,000 down to about $3 grand, 3 to 5 grand. No.
And in span of, what was the time?
15 years. Yeah,
Wow.
15 years. So.
One of my favorite questions, why doesn't Tesla have it?
Oh, God, yes.
Because they're morons.
Yes, like the worst case is when you're going on like in the road and there's shady trees, and then if there's a pothole, it doesn't see it. Like visual is not enough, and like
Yeah.
why?
And
people
it
make
is still,
decision.
because it has moving parts and stuff like that, some of them are still expensive and hard to maintain on, say, a fleet of cars worldwide.
Except for the ones in Australia that do the multi-color laser. So they don't.
Yeah. So then solid state LiDAR generally is going to change all that. The prices will plummet. The security cameras will all have LiDAR, et cetera, et cetera.
So solid statement doesn't have a moving part, it's solid, so it doesn't have any vibrations or any other problems.
And while there's quite you might say, a philosophical movement to say that humans and most other living creatures use primarily vision as their sensor, and that it's incredibly capable, why should we restrict our robotic solutions to using only eyes or cameras in the case of a Tesla? Because that's how people do things, when you can add additional sensors that can be much better at, say, navigation in the dark, or through cloud, or through other environmental problems. Like robots are capable of so much more than what humans are, and we don't necessarily take advantage of that.
Okay, Michael, thanks for patiently waiting. So going back to the question, what were the challenges when you started in robotics? Which ones remain? What new challenges are?
So when I started in robotics, I was
That was PhD lab
I
back
was
at
studying,
UNSW.
so I was doing PhD in AI, and the lab we were doing robot dogs playing soccer. This is a Sony iVote, yes, very popular at the time. Lots of roboticists cut their teeth on doing these battles, and then literally, and it was hard, right? So this is trying to work out how to have the robot's camera identify where the ball was, this little field, where the goal was, how to move around, how to kick the ball, how to block, and all sorts of things. And it was really interesting. Year on year, these things would go from, well, most of the teams completely failing in the same way as the all the other challenges, to getting more and more confident over time. But what it says is the challenges are the same. Can you work out what's actually in there in the real world? And can you be effective in a dynamic world? Can you make things work? I think we're trying to do things with reinforcement learning, and a lot of the same algorithms, or at least the forebears of the same algorithms we use today. So this is around 1999. things have changed pretty dramatically since then.
Remember the promise? By the year 2030, there will be a robot team playing soccer capable of competing at the Olympics.
Mind you, I don't know that any people would want to be in the, play against them.
But that is closer to coming
So
true than most
it's,
of
I
the
think, I think it absolutely is. Safety may be a challenge.
So how likely is that?
Well, I think it's highly likely, and certainly given the changes we're seeing at the moment in terms of the types of new agility that are being shown by robot videos in terms of physical world, how they can do behavioral cloning, how they can basically navigate the world in ways that are much closer to animals than ever before. I think those things are very viable. Now, that doesn't mean that we've found use cases for those new capabilities. And I think that's the thing that I'd focus on in terms of the challenges today. We have this amazing range of new capabilities that have come online over the last few years. Amazing, and it's ever expanding, right? So there's new things we can do. LLM is part of that. Foundation models, transformers are part of that. We don't know yet what are the pragmatic ways to actually use the things, right? And that's the joy of all of this at the moment. There's some areas that are really clear. So automated forklifts, really obvious use case and one that people are asking for and looking for. There's emerging use cases as well. So humanoid robots being used in warehouses, powered clothing, a raft of other things that are out there that are looking to see what works. And this is part of what we're seeing with all of the enthusiasm with large language models and with expanding what we can do with robots at the moment, where people are trying the new thing and seeing if someone cares. Right? And one of the things that I would really like to see more of is, let's work out if someone cares before we go and build it. Right? There's research. Research, if it matters, we should keep doing all those sorts of things. But if it's a company, let's do the work up front to find out if there's a business there.
Thank you. So, Saurabh, we had actually a session, Saurabh and I, a few weeks ago on, just kind of a little history of robotics and then kind of a summary of that. Could you just, for refreshment for me and the audience who's not necessarily so deep in robotics, like what type of robotics do we have, humanoids versus none, and how do you categorize different types of robots?
I think some of them might disagree with me, but I'll give it a shot. I think history-wise, I think robotics can be classified into broadly two sections right now. It would be like the ones that are very, very specific to a purpose of what the application is, and one that are generic robots that we think about humanoids, where it can do a broad spectrum of things. It can do a lot of things not so well, or it can do one thing really well, and depends upon how you look at the application. The other aspect of it is like, if you look at the categories in which the robots are, even today, majority of the robots are found in manufacturing or in industrial applications. Think about the car factories, think about warehouse automations. That's where majority of the robotics will be found today. I think what we see in person on a daily basis, like Roombas or Neatos or autonomous vehicles, that is collectively less than 10% of the robots that we see outside of the world. But because most of these are used in applications where we don't see them, they're behind certain applications that are not on our day-to-day use cases. One more thing I want to add to the previous question was like you asked about how close are we to playing soccer and stuff like that. I think those applications, I think back in 2014, 15, we saw at Toyota where they had a robot which could shoot basketball from anywhere in the court perfectly. It has the best record. But the question is, do you want humans in the loop at there? And that's where, same with the autonomous vehicles, like vehicles can drive itself as long as there are no humans around it. So the robots are there. We are the imperfections in the system, or we are the bugs in their system. So I think.
No one tell the AI.
So I think when you think about the history of it, like we have made enough progress, but we have made it in a progress where the environment-wise we are still to adapt to it. But history-wise, I think the application-wise, we have built several of these applications out well enough to function in an environment. So think about like, we could send a robot to Mars and it can navigate itself, but it cannot navigate from one point of the Palo Alto to another, which is like surprising, right? So
So thank you for that. And this is why they say, please stop posting these videos of when you're testing your robots, you're kicking them, because the robot's gonna be trained on the information they see, and then there's like, oh, kicking, apparently it's like a good thing. You don't want robots to start kicking human beings. Please do not do that. But also, as per comment, you said like, seeing in 2030, a football team playing soccer in World Cup in a level. One question I have is actually, is there any use case that we absolutely need humanoid robots to do it? Why are we working on it? Are they useful, or is it just because we want to do something inspired? So is there any application that humanoids are absolutely necessary for it?
So, well, emergency response might be, and Kennedy. So the key here really is to say we design the world for people. We can go around places, we can get into and out of areas because we are the shape we are. Most robots, well, you have wheels, you need a flat surface, and there's various solutions for going up and down stairs. But if you're trying to pick up packages or similar, you might need to be able to do it in the same space as a human being. Right, so there's advantages to basically bringing a robot into the same form factor that the world has been designed for. Now, if you're going to redesign the world, if, for example, you have a warehouse where you're going to say, let's build it from scratch so that I can use purpose-built robots, well, humanoid doesn't help very much. So there's a broad range of things that we believe that humanoid robots, and Andra's dying to respond here. So,
Love the tension.
yeah. I'm getting concerned now. So, but one of the challenges that we do see, and one of it's really, really interesting that there's some assumptions that in the humanoid robot space that if I build it in the right space, if it has 5 fingers, it can do everything a person can do. Well, maybe. And if indeed that axiom is correct, and I would agree with Andra on that one, if it's correct, then there's all sorts of interesting things that can be possible. I think a far more pragmatic approach, and this is what agility robotics has done, is to look at solving one problem really, really well. Let's target in on the things. Again, it's about what's the problem that matters, but otherwise it's difficult to solve and is in sufficient volume to make a really big business, right? And so they're focused on tote handling in warehouses, right? Let's just get really specific, solve those things. Now, what's interesting, it's been a lot of discussions here, the large language model thing does allow us to potentially broaden out those tasks really rapidly. So it's an interesting time. But pragmatism says, what's the one thing that I can solve at scale right now? And so I think that humanoid robots, really, really interesting. The approaches that might be taken, the approaches that are being taken, I question for a bunch of the companies that are out there.
Has anybody seen LimX? LimX Dynamics? It's a 4-legged robot with wheels on the end of the legs. Now, they've only came out a year or 2 ago. That robot, you may have seen videos of it going up into bipedal stance and then using its front legs, top legs, what have you, with wheels to pick up totes and to do what agility is doing. Certainly doesn't look quite like a humanoid, although it is capable of, the form does the function for most of the tasks that we're talking about. Now, there is one really compelling reason for humanoid robots. It is because we are humans. That's it in a nutshell. Now, that is the area that I came from, human-robot interaction. We see our world anthropomorphizing everything around us. It is a cognitive bias. It's a whole set of cognitive biases that we cannot escape. We evolved successfully because of them. And because of that, when we want to see a robot agent, then we want it to have features that we recognize. Now, this is really handy when it comes to understanding what direction a robot might be going. There are all sorts of things that, we studied with autonomous driving and all the rest. How do you know whether it's safe to cross at a pedestrian crossing if there's no driver in the car? Most of us, we look at the car and we see where the driver's looking before we step out and play chicken. Okay, so that is really the ground, that's the basic reason for humanoids. The other reason is sometimes species are rather vainglorious and they like robots that are in their image. And curiously, vanity robots do attract a lot of funding. And the claim that they're going to be general purpose. Now, I think that's a little bit like the claim that LLMs are heading towards AGI. There's a whole nother argument. But yes, humanoids, because we want to interact with robots socially. Otherwise, for all those tasks, like the LimX robot can do the same things as a humanoid with a very different form function.
Maybe.
If you saw the DARPA Robotics Challenge, can do what Agility was doing right up till recently. Now, once Agility gets its end effector tool changes going, no, LimX is going to have to do the same thing to keep up. But DARPA Robotics Challenge, if you saw that, it was called the Humanoid Robot Challenge, but there were at least 2 robots there. And in fact, the winning robot had wheels, not legs, but it had multimodal mobility. And my favorite robot there was RoboSapiens from NASA JPL, which didn't restrict itself to any orientation. It may have looked like it had, roughly speaking, 4 legs or arms, but the orientation around which it deployed them was entirely functional. And now, on to which...
So I agree with you on it's all about the UX. Getting the HRR right is pretty much the only reason to make it look like a human, in my opinion. Though they are very cool. And in particular, the agility bot can do things that are superhuman. So it's shaped human, except for the knees, but it can do some cool things. That's it. That's all. Oh, I
This is one topic that most roboticists are very strongly opinionated about. So it's like either you're for it or against it. When you guys think about robots, what do you think about? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Humanoids.
Right. So I blame science fiction for half of it.
Raise your hand if you think
Wally,
you like to see humanoids robots in your daily life. Raise your hand if you like just functional robots, who cares how they look. And raise your hand if you think, if you really want to think about mimicking nature, humans lost a lot of functionality when they lost their tail, or,
back the tail.
right? Right? It's it's not about, I asked the founder who was building a humanoid robot. It's like, oh, evolutionary human body has been perfect. That's why we mimic it. And I'm like, no. And then the question is why we're so obsessed with humanoids or dog-like. If you want something, if dogs cannot do a lot of things. Seriously,
Snakes are
that most of the things they do actually, if they can grab something and they don't have that mouth or.
That's not how you get a dog.
Literally, yeah, and he has a dog, so he knows whereof he speaks. But again, my thesis was around how we give identity and agency, how we attribute that to robots. And I went back through all the robot competition data back to the early 1980s. There was a surprising amount out there, and it became clear that at a conceptual level, the micro mouse, the mouse mazes, the robots that were smaller than a cat had a very different sense of identity in all the people that worked with them, that named them, and that wrote about them. that was very different to once you got it at about a cat level up to around about a small pony. And once you got bigger than that, then you became big and scary. And you were, again, a very different sort of object. And we anthropomorphized quite differently. So it seems to be very much based around the human kind of templates for what we interact with most in our lives, and that's companion animals. And, well, sorry, phones, yes, but evolutionarily speaking, companion animals and other people.
No, exactly the point I was gonna make is like the companion aspect of robotics, especially now very touching about social robotics aspect of how we integrate them in our daily lives or in our personal life. I think humanoid form factor or dog form factor makes more sense.
Actually, could you tell us what social robots are?
So social robots are basically the ones that are used for multiple purposes, like one that would be a home, like you today, most of you have seen Alexa or Google Home or Google Assistant, and you had a screen and just a voice. But think about the evolution of that, where it actually is able to manipulate your environment or has I would say embodiment, where it can act on certain ways. Think about it like a fancy toy. A Jibo was one of them. Rosie the robot, but Rosie was useful. These won't be very useful, but these are more of a companionship. So there is one robot, I forgot the name, the pet one.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
The seal.
Haro was the.
Yeah, so there is a seal robot which is used as a companion robot for elderly and making them feel connected to a pet, but without having to walk the pet around, right? Because they don't have energy to do that. So I think those are the kind of robots which both will have a lot more to gain from LLMs and Gen-AI aspect, but also the and humanizing other or like making anthropomorphic shapes or all those makes a lot more sense. Personally, like I was just talking about this today with somebody with Aibo, right? Like a lot of people connected with Aibo not because of how the robot worked, but also because of the cuteness factor of it and the dog form factor. A lot of people in Japan bought it just because of the way it looked and way it functioned. It had nothing to do with they had no idea how the robot and what the robot is doing. But that was the only reason it was successful was it had the shape of a dog.
Okay, so this initial conversation went much longer than I wanted to, so I'm now diving on the promised conversation. And before that, do you have a very urgent question?
Not urgent, but.
Okay, just keep it, we're gonna come to questions soon. So generative AI and robotics, I try to, ask you guys what problems persist. Going back to my comments earlier that I kind of having this intuitive sense that might be 100% wrong. This is not my field. That's why I have the amazing people here to help me learn. Is that I feel, generative AI hasn't really hit robotics the way it hits the rest of the world through just LLM. It has been used for communicating with robots, but in the sense of not LLM, but literally the generative AI part that what impact it could have when it's really harnessed. Like one of the biggest challenges and areas that we need it for is training a lot of models, and also majority of you are familiar with this thesis that teaching robots what we learn through a lot of practice and learning and logic, AI, not robots, is really easy. But teaching AI things that we learn so intuitively that we don't even know how we learned it is almost, impossible. Think about every average 16-year-old in US after 20 hours can learn to drive rather safely-ish. And now after how many millions of hours of these self-driving cars have been trained and they're still not fully reliable. And when I got my Tesla initially, the first few months, I had so many fights and arguments with my Tesla, and my cousin was in the car. He's like, Sarah, you need to go to a couple therapy. Issues with your car. Because it does.
Yeah, trust issues.
It does, like literally is like driving like a jerky, like 16-year-old who just is training to learn and then make the decision and like gas and brake and like can't, and the super dumb stuff after millions.
What Arshan said, like.
Try real talk,
Right, so it's after millions of hours of training, there is not a single super reliable system. So what is the, what are we hoping for the generative power of generative AI could contribute? And if it hits, like, let's explain what are the areas we're hoping that it could help. And then we will dive into when it really hits, how would the world look like?
Arshan, gonna start with the pragmatic.
Yeah, maybe.
Am I the pragmatic guy? Back to my comment about imperfect data and imperfect actions. You want to be able to hallucinate in the case of robotics a lot. And so some of the transformer ideas having a better context leveling of how to hallucinate what you can't actually see or what might happen after you take an action that you're pondering taking, I think is going to be very fruitful. And if you, depending on how you define generative AI, like doing planning rollouts and saying what's going to happen in the world after you take whatever action you're going to take over the next time horizon, could be seen as a generative function that robots have been doing for ages.
I might even go more pragmatic.
Uh-oh.
So if you're deploying a physical robot, you really don't want to have a chance that it hallucinates and does something that damages people or similar. Right. So talking with some of my friends, they're working out how to deploy robots into work cells. You put an engineer on that task. The generative AI actually is a really nice way of getting a first draft of the configuration. Right? Still a human in the loop. And the best practices for using generative AI in real world applications is human in the loop. So it scares me when you say, well, let's just have a go. Right? That's going to work really well, but you need some really strong guardrails on the thing. The other one that I think is really undersold is that the underpinnings of large language models, transformers, have been really transformative for reinforcement learning, right? And that's transformers. That's the sheer amount of GPU power that's available now, right? So reinforcement learning, which is enabling an enormous amount of today's robotics and really the coming decades worth of robotics, has just taken a big step function leap forward in what's possible.
I would say, let's rephrase this. Not what is generative AI going to do for robots, but what are robots going to do for generative AI? Because really, this is where the gold rush really begins, when we start to shift into large multimodal models, where we start to look at the relationship with the physical world, look at movement, look at things with the passage of time. All of these things can be, are going to be really, really fruitful for transformers and all of the learnings built around this current technology. We've come so far with large-scale language models, but that's, I believe that has plateaued. GPT-5 is nowhere near coming out. And when it does, any benchmark differences are pretty much impossible to determine between that and Claude and others. We've hit a plateau. And what we are doing that breaks that is incorporating new forms of data. Now, robots are just basically data collectors. And they're going to be going into places that we have never been able to digitally collect or to collect data and digitize it. And that's just really exciting. The other thing that I will just say to finish this off is I've gotten involved in a lot of the ethics discussions for robotics and AI. And what happens is when it's an AI audience, ethics guidelines focus on privacy, transparency, explainability, and truthfulness perhaps, and where the sources have come from, etc. But when you talk about the same things with robotics, safety, 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 and safety. And everything else is taking quite a third row seat compared to safety. And you will not have a commercial robotics deployment that proves to be unsafe. And even Elon Musk is fighting with the FTV around safety and autonomous cars.
So before moving on, I have a couple of thoughts and maybe a question will come out of what you just said is safety is very important to the point that, you know, it made me think a lot that I don't know where I read it or somebody told me the most advanced humanoid right now in order to stop it, make it paralyzed, all you need like 5 children under 5 years old can stop the most advanced humanoid. I'm like, what do you mean? It's like, if the 5 children stand around the humanoid robot, it's not gonna do anything, right? And then, you know, so we have pushed safety to the point that every human being, every single human being, if it's in that situation, can gently push them aside, but in
I
that.
don't actually believe that. I would be very reluctant to put the mold of 5-year-olds out there. I have seen young children, generally more about the 8 years old, 9 years old, ambush mobile robots in shopping malls and other places and do that. Let's just surround it and then it doesn't know which way to go game. And then if they were all boys, they would start kicking it too. Just, I don't know why,
But the point is, like, when they're like helpless, they're 3 years old, 4 years old, like innocently, you just place them around it, is like,
No.
what is it gonna do, right? The robot is not gonna push them away, I don't think so.
it quite well could.
Okay,
It
so then
absolutely
let's just
quite
use
well
this
could.
idea for the sake of arguments. From
Yeah.
one side, we don't really want them to do what if like they're harmed. From the other side, you know, again, everything is a scale, you know, even in generative AI, a lot of people say, oh, no, generative AI can automate everything. And another group of people, oh, you can't trust generative AI, you need human in the loop. And I always like to remind people it's not black or white, it's a scale. You know, you have to decide what scale of human control you want to have, what scale of automation. And now when it comes to safety, here's the question. What is there kind of like, I don't know what is the right word, is it hypocrisy that we have here? We have already, for decades, we have a human-controlled robot that kills 1.35 million people a year, and we're okay with it. But when we want to car accidents, globally, more than 1 million people die every year, which, you know, in perspective, they're robots, and they're actually 100%, 99% controlled by human beings. But then when we want to bring some, you know, like even today, safe self-driving cars are way more safer than human drivers. So where is the balance? Like,
The problem is, and this was said earlier, the problem is human drivers and self-driving cars on the same road because each behaves differently. And it is the difference in behavior that is a real problem. Now, we've evolved legal codes based around the idea that a person either deliberately did something that hurt you or accidentally did something that hurt you. And it hinges around the agency or control. Now, when you talked about people, 1.5 million deaths in self-driving cars, with people in control. So what we do is we use the legal system to see it as whatever was happening with the technology, there was a person in control. Now, we haven't done the same sort of incorporation into social codes and law for self-driving vehicles. And we have this incredible difficulty on the intersection point. Like personally, I would rather be on a road with self-driving vehicles and no humans than the mixture. So, but back to the point about the safety of robots. I know the state of art for humanoid robot safety, and they're talking about reducing the natural weight of the robot or incorporating softness. None of them are focusing on death by 5-year-olds. And the only thing I hope is that there's a big red e-stop on all of the humanoids out there, but probably won't be because you know what? You see that big red button? If you're an 8-year-old, you're going to push it.
So I agree with there's a big red stop. I think that's a requirement for anything that's deployed under this circumstances. So yes, we'll see that. I wanted to add to what Andra said with the note that these are all engineered systems. So we can't talk about, LLMs being deployed and having these sorts of capabilities. The way we see them in the world, the same with robots and robotic technologies in general. These are the bits of capability with lots and lots of software around the outside, and the affordances, the types of safety, the risks involved are really down to the architects of those particular systems and the regulations they have to fit within. I'm really wary if we say, okay, LLMs are dangerous because this, and they can't trust them because of that. While we are, in many cases, so I use a raw session with ChatGPT. I think the fear that we have is that they're going to be used in these really broad and wild ways. I don't see that happening. I think they're more. They're a component in a much larger system, and the same with robots. This is an engineering exercise, and so it really comes back down to what are the human engineers enabled, what are the regulations required.
So to Andra's point, does it come to just a legal challenge? The reason, you're explaining because legally we don't know how to deal with like a few people who have died as a result of self-driving cars versus million, more than 1 million people who die every year, just because we can blame or have a legal system to blame or find fault in human being, and we don't have the similar thing for self-driving. Is that the biggest hurdle of making them ubiquitously available?
Well, just one comment, and then I'll let Saurabh take over that, because I know he's done a lot with vehicles. Volvo stepped out of the autonomous vehicle race because their entire brand is built on safety. And if there was one accident with a self-driving vehicle that was a Volvo vehicle, it would destroy their brand. You would think that maybe Volkswagen would have considered that before they faked their emissions, but your brand is an important thing.
I think it's in general, going back, it's our psychology, right? There's one shark attack that happens, and everywhere it's a headline that a shark killed a human. But we kill millions of sharks every year, nobody gives a shit, right? It's about the perception about we are at the top of the food chain and we couldn't get harmed by anybody, including robots first. If we kill each other, that's fine. So the car accidents that we do, and we have, that's fine. Because like my first startup, trust me, I spent years trying to fight this battle of oh, people should care about safety. People don't. They expect someone else will care about safety, but they themselves don't. That's why you see so many people still use your cell phone while they're driving. It's common sense. Don't do it, but no. And we are all guilty of doing it. I'm not saying anybody else. I've been there, right? Oh, it was just an emergency, but that's what causes this accident. When it comes to cars, there's also another thing is you can point to one entity. Entire autonomous vehicle in SF is driven by one company, Waymo right now. If one accident happened, you can blame to one entity. But if millions of us are having accidents, there's no single person to blame. So it's easy to have that, oh, that's the thing to blame. So it also comes down to do we have somebody we can blame? Or, is there a person or entity? Or is it more oh, everybody else is responsible for their own thing, right?
Okay, I have one last question, rapid fire real quick, and then we'll open to audience and question. I see some hands raised. So what is the coolest thing that you have seen in robotics happen this past 12 months?
The amazing new things that robots can do with reinforcement learning, right? So we're seeing videos of robots with levels of agility that are really remarkable.
Sorry, I thought the figure demo was pretty badass. The very, very dexterous manipulation that they showed it doing. And I've never seen it live, but if that video was real, I thought it was pretty cool.
How can you skip this?
Yeah.
Oh,
One time, two.
Yeah.
I've just forgotten half of the things that came to mind, but I will say, taking a step beyond,
Coolest thing ever.
air taxis, autonomous air taxis. Archer's just done a qualification flight, Joby, Whisk, they're all getting ready to go. And the Paris Olympics are intending to use autonomous air taxis or probably pilot it for the Paris Olympics. They're also planning on rolling out literally delivery robots everywhere. In some ways, you know, it's a little bit of an advertising thing, but on the other hand, something like the Olympics is a bit of a forcing function. And I think the choice that the fact that this is becoming a commercial technology, while it's really, pardon the phrase, it's taking off while most of us aren't looking. And I find that exciting. So I guess I'm spoiled because I spend a lot of time looking at the humanoid robotic space. And it's like super, super exciting what is happening there. And it is changing, maturing incredibly quickly. But I have to think outside that for what's really exciting. I think Toyota's soft robot Punyo is the most exciting thing in the humanoid robot space.
I'm much more similar in that front. Two things that got really excited for me last year was I got the self-driving upgrade. And as much as you hate it, having worked in that industry and having spent almost a decade in autonomous vehicles and that technology, finally seeing it in action just was like, I was just yelling at my wife, like, "Ooh, this works finally." It's been 12 years, like that was a pipe dream at that point. And that was one of the very exciting part. And B, finally a robot that doesn't suck my wires into when it's a robot vacuuming around the house. That's been a great achievement right now.
Do you know, iRobot now has a poop promise that it will use. Okay, so does anybody remember Beetle? That was a dog poop cleaning up robot, courtesy around 2016, Hacks funded. Didn't go that far, but those wonderful robot vacuum cleaners. If your little cat or dog did a whoopsie on the floor, that robot vacuum cleaner is quite capable of smearing your entire house with it.
And that has happened.
That has happened. Which is why these days they now have better sensors, better intelligence, and on version 7 of the Roomba, iRobot offers a poop promise. Our vacuum cleaner is too smart to drag shit around your house.
And that took them 30 years. 94 to 2024.
Okay, thank you so much. With that said, I would like to open it to audience with questions. You had, yeah,
So I had a couple, but I guess I'll start.
one question per person, and then we're gonna go make sure everybody asks at least one question before coming back to the same person.
Do you think the future of autonomy lies in a mix between classical and machine learned approaches, or a purely machine learned approach?
Definitely both, in my opinion. Some of that going back to the safety discussion we were just having. But I don't see how you get around some of the classical approaches. And actually right now, building a good robot, having a team that can do that really well before you can get it.
And increasingly, you know, dealing with edge devices and communication, all of those other reasons why you might not want to place all your eggs in a Gen-AI basket. But, you know, so much has been done really well with classical control systems. So you got both, use both.
So.
Hi, well, let the experts do.
Oh, no, I agree. I mean, I think very clearly if you use the best technology you have for a given problem and mix and match it is how we do engineering.
So. Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, many experts, as Andra said, also believe that, you know, we have reached, plateau the amount of data that we need to further improve the capabilities of LLM and Gen AI. What do you think, how are we gonna improve it? What's gonna happen? Or is there gonna be fundamentally different technique other than MLs that we have to do in order to have a capable AI systems?
I'll add one. I think it's the modalities of input. Right now, we're just doing speech or language, right? I think adding different dimensions to it, what it can train upon. Vision is one aspect, where it's learning about different ways and how to manipulate the environment would be the second one. So I think with LLMs are in one-dimensional plateau, but there are multiple dimensions to it, where it will continue to improve on.
These discussions around large language models get very focused on, the latest definition of AI. And frankly, I think the future there is, again, it's this mix of different technologies, and there's a lot of reliability. The good old-fashioned AI from propositional logic that's relevant in terms of pushing the boundaries in terms of when do I want this thing to imagine new stuff and when do I want it not to? How do I want to control exactly the parameters of the sort of answer it can give? And then indeed, for the robotic space, how can I have this thing have a sense of what's actually out there, or at least a model of the world that stops it making stupid errors that we wouldn't make?
Does anyone have a comment on this question? Feel free to share also your thoughts. Who wants to ask us this question?
I agree. Embodied AI is the next frontier. All the values for that. Related to the previous discussion about self-driving cars, Google had the old Prius cars with the bell bands on top driving autonomously in 2014, like 10 years ago. Dog fooding with employees, and even though they told them, there's a camera here and a camera here, and signed a piece of paper, people fell asleep on the 92. Going home before on their laptops and doing makeup, and that convinced Google to not do halfway their autonomy and go the full way with the rest of the industry. And that's why I'm saying, like, maybe probably a real self-driving car. Waymo, I've taken Waymo in the city many times now. We used to work at Cruise. I'll just leave you with a plug, because I don't think that so many amazing things will be shared. I'm applying for questions, but any of you haven't seen Mars Express yet, it finished in theaters, but it will be available on streaming. Mars Express really explores what it means to be a human or a robot, and how humans and robots will interact in the future. Highly recommend.
Thank you. And I agree with Waymo and, other full autonomous, and, to be fair, Tesla never claimed to be an L5, like completely autonomous, but for what it does, I had a lot of questions.
Two plus.
They certainly claim to be an
Both are
L5.
friends.
That's what
FSD.
Well,
we should explain.
So for those of you who don't know, there's a levels of autonomous vehicles, L1 or L0 to L5. L5 is when we'll reach Nirvana, and none of us will have to drive. But again, maybe 2 generations away from human generation's point of view. I think the closest is L3 right now. Waymo, I would say, is L3. It doesn't drive in our environment.
That's
Yeah.
fine. 4 is geofence.
Yeah.
Geofence, that's
So it's geofence, and so it's L4, but L5 is where you won't have a steering wheel.
Zoox is rolling out,
Zoox.
but it's limited deployment.
So it's still L4.
So it's geofence.
L5 is any new environment.
Just no
yeah,
steering wheel.
L5 is anywhere in the world completely autonomous, and L4 is controlled environment, fully autonomous.
And to quote Rodney Brooks again, no, to quote Brad Templeton, sorry, this one, L6 is when you say, take me home, Jeeves, and Jeeves says, not going to the beach.
So that's when we reach autonomy of the
I thought it's gonna
agents.
start
Talk
flying.
about it, on Thursday, please go.
And that's when it gets creepy. I worked on a project, something like that. The car was gonna make decisions for you. That's
So, curious how you think about the limit state of robots. So there's going to be an adoption curve, right? And what are your predictors? Like what's going to be limiting so it's not sort of continuous exponential growth?
Get your, most robots are inorganic. That's just such a massive limit factor compared to the complexity of a human body, where every cell is able to reproduce itself and or reproduce into multiple other types of cells, depending on the context that it goes into. We have in research some evolutionary type robots, some morphing type of robotics, But I think the fact that it is such a comparatively static platform is the inherent gating factor here.
It can 3D print itself.
What is it?
That was
So
the
it
startup
can
you were
3D print itself.
working on. I remember that one.
So I'll add to that to say, look, these are technologies and they will fill their niches, if you like, but their niches have to do with what demand there is for that particular product. These are companies that can build robots, make money. And you know, we're not at a point where, and we don't see a point in the foreseeable future where they go and generate, you know, replications of themselves if there's no effort. But, you know, it really just becomes, where is there a human need? Where can we solve a new problem or reduce costs? So companies will go out there and they'll do that and they'll fill their niches. Now, we don't know how big those niches are at the moment. We don't know how many there are. We don't know the shapes of these robots ultimately. We're still inventing it. It's a fantastic time. It's a truly remarkable time with this combination of Gen-AI and all the new things that are happening in robotics and all of the underpinnings that came with previous revolutions around modular computing, around GPUs, around the web, around cloud computing. I mean, the capabilities, the mix of capabilities that we can collectively expect to work with and find out how to use, it's just extraordinary.
I think, to answer your question, I think it's also the application, right? Like, think about computers or smartphones, the way they kept growing and still are growing is because we kept trying to pioneer new ones, but also there was a use case at the end where it was like, we all need one, right? None of us can now survive. Imagine having to be able to survive that. I think with robots, we have not found that use case. Once we find that, then that will open up a different dimension for like how it grows. But until we get there, it's going to be more of experimentation. You will see a lot of the ideas and failed products.
And pragmatic applications.
Yeah.
So we have one question here online from Mukul, who has a background in software. And he asks, is there a difference in the pace at which AI or even generative AI now is being adopted in robotics versus that in non-robotics or software application? Basically hardware versus software, how we're implementing it. If there is a difference in pace, why is that? I guess the question is, what is prohibiting? You know, what are the challenges? If in hardware and robotics is you're not seeing that breakthroughs that we have seen with LLMs and software.
I think normalized for developer base, it's probably about the same. Same amount of energy. People are really excited about it. It's about there's just far fewer roboticists than there are, you know, web developers.
We're looking at all of you. Robotics needs you. Okay.
So let me add one thing to that. One being, it's really cheap to experiment with software alone. Really very simple. You get a copy of ChatGPT, you start messing around, you build an interface to that. That's a low cost experiment. Doing this with robotics takes equipment, it takes the know-how, and frankly, it takes a new set of data for training these multimodal data sets. So there's lots of upside, but there's a huge amount less of the wild, enthusiastic exploration that we've seen, particularly, you know, in this area, from people who have been in the web space or crypto space or wherever. Maybe.
Also, it's the accumulation of different, I think software is one dimension of robotics. There's the hardware, the mechanical, the sensor development. Each of these is a specialized field by itself, and bringing all of this thing together, making progress along all of this dimension in parallel is going to be hard. And then, you know, somebody to look at all of these and actually make sense of it. So that's a skill that very few people have, where it's like, okay, I can see I need this and this in robotics, this in mechanical, this in sensor. There are very few Arshans who can like bring all of this together and actually build a robot as a company.
Yeah.
So I think one topic we didn't touch upon, maybe it's fair to spend a few minutes on it, is why is it so hard for robots to learn and mimic human behavior? And you know, but maybe we can talk about a little bit of complexity
How
of
much time
that.
do we have?
I just anchor that with, I think it was Galbraith that said the only thing common about common sense is how uncommon it is. We have a lot of assumptions about the fixed nature of the world and of ourselves and our own identities and of what human behavior is. But if you look at the latest in cognitive science, it's pointing to the fact that there really isn't a fixed reality for any of us, but nor fixed selves, that we, in fact, are the masters of hallucination and of rapid learning. So when we're asking robots to understand people and imitate people, we've got this completely wrong mental model that there is this truth, ground truth. There may be physics truth, but in terms of interacting with people, no, you need to become really, really good at hallucinating and approximation to understand people.
So we started with this question of what is a robot. I think if we can answer the question of what is a human, we can actually replicate it.
That's what you call it until you get good at something, and then you go.
So, in fact, this circles back to the whole anthropomorphic question, right? So we see something that moves in the world, and we think it's able to do the things that we can do because we move in the world, and therefore it should be able to do the same things. But we just have this wild over expectation. The same thing happens with, well, generative AI in general.
Yeah, Minsky's paradox.
Yeah, and you don't use the word learn, like, why can't they learn? Oh, yeah, you're already making them. You're asking, why can't they learn?
Minsky's paradox is what's sharing.
Thank you so much for bringing some philosophy into this discussion, Andra. And my question is loosely related to that. And I'm wondering, with the shutting down of Google X and Samsung Research America and a lot of kind of those OG R&D organizations which we used to look up to and now not so much, what is the next step for hardware innovation in the robotics arena? Because it seems like, because a little bit maybe of, if you look around the room, a lot of white men and those egos and those consciousnesses are smaller than the human consciousness. So how do we invite more diverse voices in a way where hardware, like actual hardware, not just the software of the thing, is modified?
I get this question, right. But I think, it's a great question, and it's one of the reasons that I'm involved with IEEE Robotics Automation Society, because if we get the right, it is an opportunity to get robotics to all regions of the world, and then to ask back, what is robotics for you? And the more people that we can get involved in things like that, the better off we will all be. Because I would love it if all of us were attempting to incorporate diversity of thought into what we did. But I'll take what I can get. That was a great question too. But did you want to?
Yeah. Actually, just as a note, it's never been a better time, in my opinion, to be a standalone robotics developer. The kind of hardware you can get your hands on for almost no money, the kind of training that you can get just for having a laptop and a web connection, just blows away anything that I had when I was growing up around it. And then maybe to answer the meta question at the very beginning, having grown up in big R&D labs and we're doing big spends, all of that has gone to the CVCs now. They just take their risk out in the real world with startups. So if you want to do something new with robotics, probably a startup right now is the better place to be than a big corporation.
Just to add to that, the reduction in price for doing these things is really meaningful. Right? So the amount of things that are going on does make that barrier to entry for anyone pretty accessible. And so it's a, we're not going to see this revolution slow down in terms of new technologies anytime soon. So lots of opportunities for people to jump on board.
Okay,
We know the Moore's law for chips and computers is about 18 months. And they said the Moore's law for AI is about 3.4 or 4.6 months. What would I would like to ask four of you, how much will be the time frame you think for robotics? And if there's one, what would be the measurable indicator that can measure that?
I think it's a combination of that, right? Because every dimension you're making progress and robotics in general is making progress, right? If you look at hardware and if you're making progress at Moore's law rate of hardware increments, I think that's impacting robots or the way they're built. Same with software, like the more smarter it can get, the more information it can process. So I think all of these things, as I said with robotics, it's a combination of all these fields. So you take a combination of that and apply it to robots, that would be the right way. So there is infinite growth right now. That's
The benchmark is hard.
Yeah, and it's serials, right? So it's not in parallel.
Yes, yeah, that is a very good point because back to roadblocks, almost everything is on some form of Moore's law. What was holding robotics back was energy. Batteries weren't improving as rapidly, and also actuation. Actuation wasn't developing novel technologies. Hello, Alex. Yes, novel actuation technologies and transmissions there in the house, but some of these, what I would say, inorganic, as opposed to non-informational technology, were still slower at scaling down. However, there are so many things that are happening. I remember a time, 2015, where people were developing gimbals for cameras on drones to stabilize the image. But by the time they'd commercialized the hardware to do so, people had developed the software to digitally stabilize the images. So even if one thing is not reducing in price, we now have so many tools in our toolkit in robotics that there are other solutions.
So agreed and agreed, right? So this is a multifaceted problem, right? To work out what's actually driving progress in robotics. To my mind at the moment, as a software guy, the piece that's really driving at the moment is the shift in the capabilities of software, of AI, the speed at which we can deploy more GPUs and similar. So my claim would be, in the dimensions that matter, we're probably at least at Moore's law, if not significantly better.
right.
Yeah, I roughly I'd agree with that. Trying to specify as a real metric that you use as a Moore's law, like the size of transistors. I don't know that robotics are that precise yet, that focus.
Well, we have Mike over there, Chris.
So thank you to everybody on the panel for sharing your perspectives. Within the context of robotics, are human beings the apex or a benchmark?
I don't even know if they're a benchmark, depending on what kind of robot you're building.
What
But
kind of
certainly
human?
not the apex.
How many humans does it take to move?
I think it's not a meaningful question, and the robots are being used for all sorts of things. It's a horizontal technology. You use it for 1,000 different things. If you said, hey, for picking and placing, human beings are a benchmark, well, yes, of course they are. Right? Are there jobs that someone's going to do? But it's the dimensions of control, the dimensions of capability of these robots are so different to people that it's really hard to make that comparison.
All right, if generative AI is predictive AI, I think it's a better name for robotics, how far ahead do your robots that you've seen invested in or work with, how far in advance do they need to be predicting? And then when do you think we'll be running those predictions on batteries the size of a Snickers bar?
I'm going to say that depends entirely on the application. So how far?
What are some ones you've seen? Like how far ahead do agility robots need to be predicting? for your forklifts when they're driving past. So that they'll show a video of there's multiple stages of forecast, right? And so yes, it's going over here. It has a rough plan and it does very detailed planning in the short term. So that, you know, multiple things going on at once.
Yeah, so same answer. At the fleet management level, we predict hours in advance. At the individual robot level, 5 seconds is pretty far out there. Go much further, it's not very useful.
Those are both pretty meaningful answers that I was just going to say things like speed, size, context. And I think that added dimension of individual is fleet and so on. Yeah.
I don't know, Sara. I thought when you said predictive in the future, I thought about Minority Report.
Well, there's different timescales. I did want to comment. You said 5 seconds in the future is interesting. Luma AI launched their free generative tool this week. Everyone can go try it. And it generates 5-second videos, but it takes 120 seconds to do so. So that would not be good on your forklift running live. It would take a lot of pauses, 2 minutes at a time.
Yeah. And just here, as an interesting anecdote, it was about 2 years ago, we started playing with a predictive AI for hallucinating where the pallet will be when you get to where the pallet is, because usually they're not straight. And after collecting a bunch of data, doing a bunch of training, what we managed to figure, the forklift figured out by itself, I guess, is that every time you move the forks, you expect there to be a pallet there. So, which is, I guess, in some sense true, but very, very useless.
Oh my gosh, that's like the AIs back in the Watson days that could work out that patient mortality was high because it said they were dead. You know, another kind of obvious.
You mentioned that most of the robotics is deployed right now on factories and not in, you know, everyday life. I wonder, do you think the society is impairing the deployment of robotics in everyday life, such as, you know, people probably are not ready for their favorite barista to be replaced by a robot, even though the technologies were ready for that for a long time?
There's a number of companies that have tried to replace the friendly barista with the coffee robots. It's not made sense to me and they haven't survived much. But as far as scale goes, there are 4.5 million industrial robots in the world. That is not many. There are 435 million cars since 2008 deployed globally, and they are all technically robots. There are approximately 70 million robot vacuum cleaners in the world. And where we're starting to see scales, and I don't have the exact figures, is in the logistics space, in all of the, I say it's not self-driving cars, it is self-driving cargo. And a lot of times we might see it on the sidewalk, but most of it is in the back of warehouses, retail facilities, and other places. And the size of these fleets has gone up hugely since 2014 or so. I don't have the exact figures, maybe.
Well, so the biggest ones I know of are the Keay systems that Amazon is deploying. And I don't work at Amazon.
They have 750,000.
I think they crossed 1 million, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So 1 million bots deployed into these massive fields, not in one of them, but in many. And with that, actually, I apologize, but I have to go. So thank you all.
So please, thank you so much, Arshan. We have 1 or 2 more questions and then. So, okay. Do we have anybody else?
Just a very quick one, but maybe for the investor focused analyst. When we look at the 4.3 million industrial robots that are deployed, there's a significant hurdle rate to the industrial businesses getting ready to accept this. But the value stream is very well known and it can scale well. So like efficiency in production, your operational efficiency, and often the robots are now the bottleneck, interchange costs and so forth. So someone over there mentioned embedded AI. Do you guys have any comments just on the size of the market as you see it in addressing this industrial leapfrog to get back or get onto the software side? And I'm kind of more interested in the software that drives the robots. Just your thoughts on the market opportunity
and software in the deployed base of existing robots? Software in the deployed base of existing robots. That's a tough one, right? So that's a market size, a significant proportion of all of industry, right? Potential is absolutely there. The challenge has been, we've been talking about this for such a long time. Let's do Industry 4.0 and revolutionize it all. We haven't worked out what the unlock is for that, right? And so I'm cautious about saying, hey, that's a space. I'm much more interested in saying, here's a new type of capability that I can validate that someone really cares about, whether it's on the software side or the hardware side. That is a slice of the market, right? Really, yes, it's about being really pragmatic about what that opportunity is before going and developing. It always scares me when various people come and pitch and they say, here's a platform that's going to solve this broad swathe of problems. Again, that's so you get that. But it
has to be narrow focus.
Very narrow focus. And within that, though, I mean, all of that market potential is absolutely there. Right? And there's a tremendous need, demographic shift, onshoring, all of those things. We have to do this, yes, but we've also got to find the unlocks.
Yeah, having just come out of 2 years partnership with the Association for Manufacturing Technology, I have been up close and personal with the manufacturing industry. And we have innovators' dilemma with this. Most of the large companies that could afford to radically change their modes of automation already invest in a lot of technology that is still working well enough for their needs. And that's why we've seen autonomous mobile robots practically not at all in that industry, but in the logistics industries and in many, many new industries. So if I was going to say, I'm going to put one chip down on where will we see the next kind of big thing, I'd say go biomanufacturing, where you're looking at effectively not competing with existing automation infrastructures so much, really wide open new processes.
Wasn't role of Ross that? Like, wasn't Ross trying to do exactly?
Ross doesn't have any traction with industrial robotics, and they are very, very conservative about everything. I mean, CNCs are new technologies to an extent.
So in what specific context, like object handling or navigation, do you see reinforcement learning excelling in?
I think reinforcement learning really works well when you have like repeat applications like pick and place or within a certain specific area. I think it works great and that's applications. For general purpose applications where it has to navigate a new environment all the time, I don't think reinforcement learning really works because you're trying to think about this, like it's a repetitive task, you're trying to automate that. That's those kind of tasks are where reinforcement learning works great.
Environments where you have simulation, right? So reinforcement learning in particular. So yes, I agree with Saurabh is saying that the nature of this is it needs lots and lots of data. You get a highly accurate simulation, you're in a better place to really use reinforcement learning because you just keep on doing epochs and epochs. And that really is across lots of different fields, and it depends a lot on what sort of knowledge you use in all those sorts of things.
Last question.
Yeah, hello. Thank you very much for the information. My name is Saurabh, and I have started a company. So we started a company with general purpose humanoid robots. So the point is, it's a lot of like capital needed for that field, and even though the big companies such as Figure recently raised a $600 million with $1 billion valuation, one of the first company with $1 billion valuation. So my question: what is their vision? What's their visioning with the $600 million in building a general purpose humanoid robot? So if their vision is going to the market, what is it going to be? Initial application. I don't think so. In recent years, we're going to see general purpose humanoid robot doing all the actions in the market. We can. It's technically impossible. So how far we are, and what's the VC's vision behind it? What is their aiming to build a general purpose humanoid robot with $1 billion valuation? Thank you.
That's a very topical, complicated. Okay, no, it's we're seeing, we're at the top, at the peak of the hype curve, the generative AI. Right, and so there's lots of people saying, you know, if I can capture some core technology right now, that's going to be worth an enormous amount in the future. I'm not convinced, right? So they'll have some hypotheses around the initial applications for these general purpose robots, general purpose humanoids, but I don't think that matters. I don't think that's what they're focused on. They're saying we can use large amounts of GPUs and solve some core problems in understanding the world of these things. And there's an assertion there that may or may not be right. Right? So they're taking a bet on that being true. And I mean, I think it's a pretty enthusiastic bet, you would say.
It's an arms race.
Well, it's an arms race with a binary outcome, right? Where there's a good chance that they won't get there, but if they do, it'd be great.
No one going out for funding in that space can afford to say, we're just going to make an ordinary humanoid that's capable of doing one thing well. Well, actually, there's maybe space for 1 or 2 companies to say that, but that niche has already been occupied. Everybody else is promising
There's a
much.
lot of niches. There's a lot of
Whether or not
niches.
they deliver.
Apple is building human robots.
Yeah. I'm currently tracking around 40. Probably more than that because I met 2 new stealth companies last week. It's crazy.
So let me put that in a bit of perspective. About 5-6 years ago, there were few car companies that didn't launch a single product, went IPO, and have still not shipped a single product at scale, and they are multi-billion-dollar companies. So it was the wave, and I think that's what there is another wave right now where people are like, oh, Tesla is building this humanoid, oh, Agility is doing well. Let's also build that without clear application, but because of the cool factor of it, they get funded too. And then they're showing few applications of what it can do really well with, and definitely setting a dream, right? And I think that's what people want to be part of, is the dream. Everybody is like a Star Wars fan, like, oh, I'm going to get a R2-D2 or a C-3PO at some point. But what they're not able to understand is like, there are better optimized way of doing what these robots can do in a much not so cool looking form factor.
So we are past time, but I want to ask a quick question. Does anybody have any comment, not necessarily question, they wanted to share that we missed it or they have different opinion? We have like 2 minutes for that. Okay. It's just one last comment from somebody who's not spoken so far, and then we'll wrap.
Thank you. My comment was, I really was intrigued and enjoyed when the conversations veered into the ethics about cars and was saying, I was very intrigued by the ethics part of it, and especially about how the legal system, if you can blame one person, then that's what's holding us back. But if you can blame everyone, then it's okay. You can kill a bunch of people. So that was very, very interesting and intriguing. It made me think about if we do as people kind of get robots to the point where they can take care of us, are we as humanity going to be able to just look to robots as like the benevolent caretakers and let go of that control? That was my comment.
Anyone from the audience has a comment on that?
When I was working at Cruise, I used to say that the one job I'm really glad I don't have to have is the lawyer that has to sign a piece of paper that says we embedded this system and it is safe. And I said, somebody always has to take responsibility in a corporation. And yeah, I don't know how they did that because I left before they took the driver's out.
We know that has anyone read Yuval Harari? And the idea that corporations are really our first artificial intelligences. And they have their own identities, they have their own life. And we recently had a self-driving car fatality, not that recent, sorry, the Tucson pedestrian that was killed. And ultimately, the state said, well, it wasn't our fault. And Uber said, well, it wasn't our fault because there was a human driver as a safety driver. And they had a lot of money, so they put the safety driver in the hotspot. And I think that has a lot to do with the way that corporations are creations to avoid that individual responsibility. And while that allows us incredible innovation, it's the underpinning of our economics. But at the same time, you know, for me, this is just going to happen over and over again, not just with robotics, but with AI, where we can talk about the ethics, but pragmatically speaking, it kind of comes down to who has the most money and the biggest lawyers.
I think one last thing I would say, like I think it's going to be a challenging few years for humanity in general with living or coexisting with being that could outsmart us. So that, and now put that into anthropomorphic form factor and robots, and which has infinite memory and infinite access to all this data that no human can do or have together. So it's just gonna be very interesting to be in the presence of such a awe-inspiring entity.
So I'm going to push back on that one.
Which is run by, well, let's think of, what are some major corporations we have dealings with on a regular basis? Is it the IRS superintelligence or the Kaiser Permanente superintelligence or the AAA superintelligence? I kind of fear that any superintelligence we get is going to be so filtered through human stupidity that it won't matter.
Which is also, so this is exactly the process we're in at the moment. We will, look, we've learned how to use mobile phones. That's changed how we operate day to day. We've learned how to use the internet. We use Google all the time as external memory. We do self-driving. We do all that sort of stuff, right? We just change how we play in the world. These represent new tools, new ways of us accessing things. We will adapt. It's not going to be simple, and there will be legal challenges. I agree, right? I'm not convinced. I'm not concerned about superintelligences. I think there's a bit of over-enthusiasm, should we say? But they may appear to be superintelligence in particular dimensions, in particular ways, right? But ultimately, we will adapt, and we're going to learn how to use these things in the same way that we learn how to use any new technology. It's a process, it's a time, it's an exciting time, and a daunting time. It's an interesting time.
With that said, I would like to thank the amazing panel that we had. Thank you, my dear friend Saurabh, for introducing me to amazing people, and I feel especially blessed sitting in between the power couple of robotics. How long have you been married?
Oh, boy. Okay, I supported his PhD.
You claim Fifth Amendment. So yeah, and very warm thanks to Arshan, even though we had to lose him sharply at 7:30. So thank you so much for everyone who was here, and you are the reason I keep going. I get excitement, I get energy. I came here, I had 10-15 questions in mind, and I thought I'm gonna have answers to those questions, and I'm leaving here with about 150 questions. Was not helpful in, you know, reducing the number of questions, but it was definitely amazing to, you know, have some insight to think about, and I learned a lot, and I hope you found it useful. We can hang out here for another half an hour. Please do meet, say hi to someone you haven't met, and connect. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, and please, again, my only ask from you is to, you know, comment on my post and then follow it, share it. And the only reason I'm asking is I hope we can have more people come. And if this is useful, I hope it would be useful for more people. With that said,